Hürtgen Forest, Germany, November 2, 1944. Generalleutnant Hans Schmidt, commanding the 275th Infantry Division, is standing in a bunker carved into the frozen earth 2 kilometers south of the village of Wassenach, reading a situation report that makes no sense. The report, typed on a Wehrmacht Field Headquarters Olympia typewriter and preserved in the unit war diary at the Bundesarchiv-Militärarchiv, states that the American 28th Infantry Division has been attacking the same 400-meter stretch of ridgeline for 6 consecutive days. 6 days, the same ground. They are not maneuvering. They are not probing for weak points. They are walking into interlocking fields of machine gun fire, taking catastrophic casualties, and coming back the next morning to do it again. Schmidt has been fighting since Poland in 1939. He has seen the French collapse in 1940, watched Soviet human wave attacks shatter against prepared positions in 1941 and 1942, commanded rearguard actions through Italy in 1943. He knows what desperation looks like. He knows what competence looks like. This is neither. The Americans are using tactics that the Wehrmacht abandoned after the first weeks of the First World War. They attack in broad daylight, on predictable schedules, with no artillery preparation worth the name. Their infantry advances in clumps, not fire and maneuver teams. Their officers lead from the front and die in the first bursts of MG-42 fire. They do not bypass strongpoints. They batter themselves against them until the attacking unit ceases to exist as a fighting force. Schmidt's after-action report, dated November 8, 1944, describes the American tactics as unimaginative, wasteful, and operationally incomprehensible. He notes that if the Americans fought this way in Russia, the Red Army would have destroyed them in a week. But here is the thing Schmidt cannot explain, the detail that appears in his report without commentary. The Americans keep coming. Every unit that is destroyed is replaced within 48 hours. The replacements are green, poorly trained, often barely capable of operating their own weapons. But they are there, in the line, attacking again. By November 16, the 28th Infantry Division has ceased to exist as an effective combat unit. Out of 8,000 men who entered the forest, fewer than 2,500 are still in the line. The division is pulled out and sent to a quiet sector in the Ardennes to rebuild. Schmidt's 275th Division holds the ridgeline. The Americans do not take Wassenach. By the measures the Wehrmacht has used for 5 years of warfare, tactical proficiency, casualty exchange ratios, ground held, this is a German victory. So why does Schmidt's final paragraph, the one his staff probably told him to delete, read, "We are killing them at a rate we have never achieved against any opponent, and we are still losing"? What did the Wehrmacht see in the Americans that their own doctrine could not process? The German General Staff went into combat against the United States Army in November 1942, believing they were facing a categorically inferior opponent, not just inexperienced. The Wehrmacht had fought inexperienced Soviet conscripts in 1941 and crushed them. Not just poorly equipped, the Italians were poorly equipped and still understood maneuver warfare. The Americans were seen as something worse, an industrialized people who had forgotten how to fight, led by officers promoted for political reliability rather than tactical skill, incapable of sustaining casualties, and certain to collapse under the kind of pressure that the Wehrmacht applied routinely on the Eastern Front. This assessment was not irrational. It was based on observable evidence, institutional analysis, and the performance of American units in World War I. It was also catastrophically wrong. The paradox is not that the Americans fought well. By November 1944, they were fighting competently, sometimes brilliantly. The paradox is that they won before they learned to fight well. They won by doing everything wrong in a way that broke the Wehrmacht's ability to understand what it was facing. The contempt begins in 1918. When the American Expeditionary Forces arrive in France in 1917 and 1918, the German General Staff watches carefully. Intelligence summaries, Selections published in the post-war German official history Der Weltkrieg 1914–1918 describe the Americans as enthusiastic but tactically primitive. They attack in dense formations. They take appalling casualties for minimal gains. Their officers are brave but inflexible. Their logistics are chaotic. They succeed not through skill, but through sheer weight of numbers and material. At Belleau Wood in June 1918, the U.S. 2nd Division takes 9,777 casualties to clear a 4-square-kilometer patch of forest held by the German 461st Infantry Regiment. The exchange ratio, American to German casualties, is nearly 7-to-1. A competent European army would have bypassed the position or starved it out. The Americans walked into machine gun fire until the Germans ran out of ammunition. The German assessment: Americans are willing to die, but they do not know how to fight. This assessment calcifies over the next 2 decades. Between 1918 and 1939, the German army, reconstituted after Versailles as the Reichswehr, then expanded under Hitler into the Wehrmacht, studies the problem of modern warfare obsessively. The Truppenamt, the covert general staff, runs war games, analyzes the failures of 1918, develops doctrines of maneuver warfare built around combined arms coordination, initiative at the small unit level, and exploitation of enemy mistakes. Every officer reads Clausewitz. Every field exercise emphasizes Auftragstaktik, mission-type orders that give subordinates the freedom to adapt to changing situations. The Americans do the opposite. The U.S. Army in the interwar period is tiny, 130,000 men in 1939, smaller than Portugal's army and intellectually stagnant. Its doctrine, codified in the 1923 Field Service Regulations, emphasizes centralized control, methodical advances, and firepower over maneuver. The Army's Chief of Staff, General Malin Craig, testifies to Congress in 1938 that tanks should be used primarily to support infantry, not as independent exploitation forces. The officer corps is promotion-locked. George Marshall is 58 when he becomes Chief of Staff in 1939, spent 38 years as a lieutenant and captain. German military intelligence, operating through attachés in Washington, and open-source analysis of U.S. military publications, tracks all of this. A 1941 Oberkommando des Heeres (OKH) assessment, summarized in David Stahil's The Battle for Moscow, concludes that the U.S. Army is 2 decades behind Germany in operational thinking, and that American industrial capacity, while formidable, cannot compensate for systemic tactical incompetence. This is not propaganda. This is the sober judgment of the institution that planned the invasions of Poland, France, and the Soviet Union. Then, in December 1941, the United States enters the war. The German General Staff watches the first year of American operations with something close to vindication. The landings in North Africa in November 1942, Operation Torch, are a fiasco of coordination. American units blunder into well-prepared German positions at Kasserine Pass in February 1943 and are routed. The U.S. I Corps loses 300 dead, 3,000 wounded, 3,700 captured in 4 days. The Germans lose fewer than 200 men. Generalfeldmarschall Erwin Rommel's assessment, recorded in his papers and cited in the official U.S. Army history Northwest Africa. Seizing the initiative in the West is dismissive. The Americans are green and their officers are incompetent. They will not be a serious threat for at least a year, if ever. Rommel is half right. The Americans are green. Their officers are making catastrophic mistakes. But he misses the second-order effect, the thing happening behind the chaos. The Americans are learning faster than any army in history. Between February and May 1943, the U.S. I Corps, reorganized under Major General Omar Bradley, goes from tactical incompetence to rough parity with veteran German units. Not because the soldiers suddenly became better, not because the officers read the right manual, but because the U.S. Army's institutional structure allowed it to replace failed commanders immediately, promote talent from below without regard for seniority. and funnel lessons learned from one division to another through a liaison system that had no equivalent in any other army. At El Guitar in March 1943, the U.S. 1st Infantry Division holds off a German armored counterattack and inflicts a 2-to-1 casualty ratio. At Hill 609 in April, the 34th Infantry Division, written off as unreliable after Kasserine, takes a fortified position the Germans considered impregnable. The German commanders in Tunisia notice, but they interpret it as variance, not trend. The Americans got lucky. They had better intelligence. The Luftwaffe failed to provide air support. The structural assessment does not change. Americans can be dangerous when they have overwhelming material superiority, but they lack the tactical flexibility to win against a competent opponent on even terms. This belief survives Tunisia, Sicily, and the first months in Italy. It survives because the evidence keeps confirming it. The Americans fight methodically, waste firepower, take unnecessary casualties, advance slowly. The Wehrmacht is being ground down, yes, but by weight of metal, not skill of maneuver. Then the Americans land in Normandy. What the Wehrmacht could not see, because their doctrine had no framework for understanding it, was that the Americans were not trying to fight a German war. German doctrine since the 1920s had been built around a fundamental constraint. Germany could not win a war of attrition. It had fewer people, fewer resources, and hostile neighbors on multiple borders. The Wehrmacht's answer was operational excellence. Win quickly through maneuver. Disrupt the enemy's decision-making cycle. Force surrenders before attrition became the deciding factor. This was not arrogance, this was mathematics. Germany's population in 1939 was 69 million. The Soviet Union's was 170 million. The United States was 131 million. The British Empire controlled a quarter of the Earth's land area. Germany had no choice but to win wars quickly or not fight them at all. The Americans had the opposite problem. The United States in 1944 had a population of 138 million. An industrial base larger than Germany and Japan combined, and no hostile neighbors. It could absorb casualties that would cripple any European power. It could afford to learn on the job. It could replace a failed division commander with a better one, and a destroyed tank battalion with a new one shipped from Detroit within 2 weeks. The American way of war, as described in the U.S. Army's own doctrinal publications and analyzed thoroughly in Michael Doubler's Closing with the Enemy, was built around 3 principles that the Wehrmacht considered weaknesses. 1. Overwhelming firepower. The Americans did not try to outmaneuver German positions, they obliterated them. A standard American infantry division in 1944 had 68 artillery pieces. A German infantry division had 36. Before every attack, American artillery fired preparation barrages measured in tons of shells per 100 meters of frontage. The Wehrmacht considered this wasteful. Artillery was for suppression, not destruction. The Americans did not care. They had more shells than they could fire. 2. Logistics as a weapon system. The Wehrmacht's logistical philosophy, inherited from the 19th century, was that armies should live off the land and carry only enough supplies for immediate operational needs. This made German units fast and maneuverable. It also meant that when supply lines were cut or stretched, units starved. The Americans built a logistics system that treated supply as more important than maneuver. The Red Ball Express, the truck convoy system that supplied the Third Army in France, moved 12,500 tons of supplies per day at its peak. A German army group in Russia was lucky to receive 3,000 tons per day. The Americans accepted that this required hundreds of thousands of men in rear echelon roles who would never see combat. The Wehrmacht considered this a scandalous waste of manpower. 3. Interchangeable units. German divisions were not fungible. An elite unit, like the Grossdeutschland Division or the 2nd Panzer Division, had capabilities no ordinary infantry division could replicate. Losing an elite division meant losing irreplaceable combat power. The Americans standardized everything. Every infantry division had the same table of organization and equipment. every tank battalion used the same procedures. Losses could be replaced with minimal friction. The Wehrmacht saw this as proof of American mechanical thinking, an inability to adapt to battlefield chaos. The Americans saw it as operational resilience. The numbers made it work. By June 1944, the United States had 89 divisions in combat or training. Germany had 315 divisions, but 200 were pinned down on the Eastern Front, and many existed only on paper. In Normandy, the Americans landed 13 divisions in the first month and had the logistical capacity to sustain them indefinitely. The Germans had 11 divisions in Normandy, no strategic reserve, and a supply system that was already collapsing under Allied air interdiction. This is what Schmidt saw at Hürtgen Forest and could not process. The Americans were not fighting for that ridgeline because it was tactically important. They were fighting for it because they could. They had the replacements. They had the artillery shells. They had the logistical capacity to feed a month-long battle in terrain that should have been impassable. The Wehrmacht was still thinking in terms of tactical efficiency. The Americans were thinking in terms of strategic capacity. Inside the Wehrmacht, there were officers who saw it coming. One was General Major Friedrich von Mellenthin, intelligence officer for Panzer Army Africa, and later Chief of Staff for the 4th Panzer Army on the Eastern Front. His post-war memoir, Panzer Battles, written in collaboration with British historian Basil Liddell Hart and published in 1956, contains a striking passage about a conversation he had with Rommel in Tunisia in early 1943. Mellenthin argued that the Americans were learning faster than German intelligence projections assumed. He pointed to the improvement between Kasserine and El Guettar, a span of 3 weeks, as evidence that the U.S. Army's institutional flexibility was more dangerous than its current tactical incompetence. Rommel, according to Mellenthin's account, dismissed this. The Americans improved because they faced second-rate German units. Put them against the Afrika Korps at full strength and they would collapse. Mellenthin pushed back. He noted that the American logistics system allowed them to bring overwhelming force to bear at any point they chose, and that German tactical skill could not compensate for a 5-to-1 disadvantage in artillery. Rommel's response: "Then we must not allow them to concentrate." This was not stupidity. This was doctrinal blindness. The Wehrmacht's entire theory of warfare was built on the assumption that tactical excellence could disrupt enemy concentrations before they became decisive. It had worked in Poland, France, Yugoslavia, and the opening phases of Barbarossa. It failed in Russia because the Soviet Union had the depth to trade space for time. But France had no depth. Italy had no depth. Surely the Americans, constrained by the Channel and the Mediterranean, could be defeated the same way the French had been. The dissent was not limited to Mellenthin. General der Panzertruppe Leo Geyer von Schweppenburg, commanding Panzer Group West in France in 1944, argued in pre-invasion planning sessions that the Americans should not be engaged in a static defense, but rather hit with mobile counterattacks after they landed, before they could establish supply depots. His reasoning, documented in the OKH planning files: the Americans cannot fight without their logistics. Destroy their dumps and they will be paralyzed. This was correct as analysis. It was also impossible as strategy. The Luftwaffe no longer controlled French airspace. Allied air supremacy meant that any large-scale German movement in daylight invited annihilation. Geyer's mobile defense required freedom of maneuver that no longer existed. But the institutional momentum was too strong. The Wehrmacht's self-image was built on tactical superiority. To admit that tactical superiority no longer mattered when the enemy could replace losses indefinitely was to admit that the war was already lost. So the reports from Tunisia, Sicily, and Italy were interpreted as anomalies. The Americans won because they had air superiority, because the Italian terrain favored defense, because German units were understrength. Never because the Americans had built a different kind of war machine that rendered traditional tactical excellence secondary. The breaking point came in France. but not in the way the Americans expected. The battle that shattered the Wehrmacht's assessment of the Americans was not a battle at all. It was a supply operation. August 1944. The U.S. Third Army, under Lieutenant General George S. Patton, breaks out of the Normandy bocage and races east across France. In 3 weeks, Patton's columns advance 400 miles, liberate Paris, and close on the German border. The advance is so fast that German units retreat without fighting, abandon prepared positions, and dissolve as organized formations. The Wehrmacht's response, captured in situation reports from Army Group B and analyzed in the U.S. Army's official history breakout and pursuit, is pure confusion. The Americans are moving faster than any mechanized force the Germans have tracked, including their own panzer divisions in 1940. But they are not concentrated. They are spread across a 150-mile front. Their flanks are exposed. They have minimal armored reserves. Any competent counterattack should cut them off and destroy them. Generalfeldmarschall Walter Model, commanding Army Group B, orders exactly that. He assembles a counterattack force of 5 panzer divisions, the largest German armored concentration in the West since D-Day, and strikes the American flank near Mortain on August 7. The attack fails within 48 hours, not because the Americans outfought the Germans in tank-on-tank combat. Not because American infantry held heroically. The attack failed because American fighter bombers, P-47 Thunderbolts carrying rockets and bombs, operating with near impunity under Allied air supremacy, destroyed German columns before they could reach the American lines. Model's post-war interrogation, preserved in the National Archives, describes the Mortain counterattack as operationally sound but impossible to execute under enemy air dominance. But the air power is not the lesson the Wehrmacht takes. Air superiority is an exogenous factor, something outside German control. The real lesson is what happens next. Patton's advance stops on August 31, 150 miles short of the Rhine. Not because of German resistance, because he runs out of fuel. The logistics system that had sustained the breakout across France, the Red Ball Express, the emergency truck convoys, the improvised supply dumps, cannot keep up. The ports in Normandy are still being cleared of wreckage. The railroads are bombed out. Every gallon of gasoline has to be trucked 400 miles from the coast. Third Army is burning 400,000 gallons of fuel per day. Supply is running at 300,000 gallons per day. The shortfall compounds. On September 2, Patton's tanks literally stop moving. The fuel trucks are empty. The supply officers are screaming into radios. For a brief moment, Third Army is more vulnerable than at any point since Normandy. The Wehrmacht does nothing, not because they do not see the opportunity. Model's intelligence staff correctly identifies that Patton is immobilized, but the panzer divisions that could exploit it no longer exist as functional units. They were destroyed at Falaise, burned out in the retreat, or scattered across a 300-mile front with no fuel of their own. By the time German forces regroup, the Americans have airlifted fuel directly to Third Army's forward positions and resumed the advance. Generalleutnant Fritz Bayerlein, commanding the Panzer Lehr Division, describes the moment in his post-war account as the day I understood we were not fighting an army. We were fighting an industrial system that could deliver fuel faster than we could destroy their tanks. The Wehrmacht was still fighting World War II. The Americans were fighting a logistics war that had no historical precedent. Hürtgen Forest, 6 weeks later, was the confirmation. The 28th Infantry Division, attacking through impossible terrain in November 1944, should have been annihilated. The Wehrmacht's tactical performance was flawless. They used the forest's natural defenses to maximum effect, positioned machine guns to create overlapping kill zones, and inflicted casualty ratios that would have broken any European army. But the Americans did not break. They absorbed 6,000 casualties in 2 weeks and kept attacking, not because the soldiers were braver than French or Soviet soldiers, not because the officers were more competent than German officers, because the American system could replace 6,000 men, ship them across the Atlantic, train them minimally, and put them in the line before the battle even ended. Schmidt's war diary for November 16, 1944, the day the 28th Division was finally pulled out, includes a line that does not appear in the sanitized post-war summaries. Killed 3,000 Americans. Received 5,000 replacements in return. This is not war. This is accounting. If your father or grandfather fought in the Hürtgen, on either side, I would be grateful to read their story in the comments. The Wehrmacht lost World War II because it optimized for the wrong victory condition. German military doctrine, since the reforms of Scharnhorst and Gneisenau after the Napoleonic Wars, had been built around the concept of Vernichtungsschlacht, the battle of annihilation. The goal was not to wear down the enemy over time, but to destroy his forces decisively in a single operational stroke. This worked when Germany faced opponents with finite armies and limited ability to replace losses. Austria in 1866, France in 1870, Poland in 1939, France again in 1940. It failed against opponents who could treat armies as renewable resources. The Soviet Union in 1941 lost 4 million men in 6 months and kept fighting because it could conscript replacements faster than Germany could kill them. The United States in 1944 lost 140,000 men between D-Day and the German surrender and kept attacking because it could train and ship replacements from a population pool the Wehrmacht could not threaten. The German response was to double down on tactical excellence. If the enemy had more men, German soldiers would simply have to kill more of them per engagement. If the enemy had more tanks, German tanks would have to be better. The Tiger, the Panther, the Königstiger. Each was a technical marvel, superior in armor and firepower to any Allied tank. Each was also a logistical nightmare, broke down constantly, and required manufacturing capacity that could have produced 4 Sherman tanks or 8 T-34s. The Americans understood something the Wehrmacht did not. In industrial war, adequacy at scale beats perfection in scarcity. A Sherman tank was worse than a Panther in every measurable way. Thinner armor, weaker gun, more likely to catch fire when hit. But the United States built 49,234 Sherman tanks. Germany built 6,000 Panthers. The exchange ratio did not matter, even if every Panther killed 5 Shermans before being destroyed, and they did not. The Americans would still have 20,000 Shermans left. This is not a satisfying lesson. It does not fit the narrative structure we expect from military history. We want to believe that skill and courage and tactical brilliance matter more than industrial output, and in specific battles they do. But across a multi-year war fought on 3 continents, industrial output is destiny. The Wehrmacht's underestimation of the Americans was not a failure of intelligence. It was a failure of imagination. They could not conceive of a military system where losing tactically could be a sustainable path to winning strategically, where an army could be worse at fighting and still better at winning. The deeper lesson applies beyond World War II. Organizations optimize for the challenges they have faced, not the challenges they will face. The Wehrmacht was the best army in the world at fighting the kind of war that had been relevant in 1870, 1914, and 1939. The Americans built an army for a war that had never been fought before. A global industrial conflict where logistics mattered more than tactics and replacement rates mattered more than casualty ratios. When the paradigm shifts, the institution that admits it first wins. Hans Schmidt survived the war. His 275th Infantry Division was destroyed in the Hürtgen Forest, not overrun, but ground down to skeletal strength by attrition. He was reassigned to a training command in Bavaria, surrendered to American forces in May 1945, and spent 2 years in a POW camp in France. After his release, he returned to his family's farm in Westphalia. He did not write a memoir. He did not give interviews. The only record of his post-war life is a brief mention in a 1963 Veterans Association newsletter, noting that he had declined an invitation to a reunion of Hürtgen Forest survivors. The newsletter does not say why. He died in 1971, The obituary in the local newspaper described him as a retired school teacher and did not mention his military service. But the line from his war diary, "This is not war, this is accounting," appears in multiple post-war histories, always without Schmidt's name attached. It has become one of those quotes that circulates because it captures a truth that participants understood but could not officially acknowledge. The Wehrmacht lost because it was better at fighting than the Americans were, and being better at fighting was not enough. That sentence should terrify anyone who builds institutions around the assumption that excellence guarantees victory. Sometimes the game changes and excellence in the old game becomes irrelevant. The Americans did not beat the Wehrmacht by becoming better soldiers. They beat the Wehrmacht by making soldiering less important than logistics, training pipelines, and replacement systems. Schmidt saw it, he wrote it down, and then he went home and never spoke about it again. Because what do you say to men who died believing that tactical skill mattered when the war proved it did not? If this kind of institutional history, the kind that examines why smart people with good information made catastrophic misjudgments, is valuable to you, this channel needs your help to reach the people who want it. A like tells the algorithm this is not generic content. A subscribe tells YouTube to surface this to people who care about the gap between how wars are fought and how they are won. Thank you for watching.